Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the co-host of this show. Check out some of our past interviews. We got some great episodes for you. I'm here with Joe Quitoni, and what we're going to be talking about is building a great culture at work and how that affects the customer experience. Those two are really related to one another. They're integrated to one another. And Joe has got 20 years of experience, including with some of the most amazing hotel chains in the world and hospitality and consulting world, helping companies to build out great culture. So we're going to talk all about that here in this episode. And of course, this episode is brought to you by EO San Francisco, which is the Bay Area chapter of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global peer-to-peer network of more than 16,000 influential business owners, 200 chapters, 60 plus countries. And if you are the founder, co-founder, or owner or controlling shareholder of a company that generates over 7 figures a year in revenue, you want to connect with other like-minded successful entrepreneurs in the Bay Area, the EO San Francisco chapter is perfect for you. It enables leading entrepreneurs in the Bay Area to learn, grow, and achieve greater success. You can go to eonetwork.org/San Francisco to learn about it and come out and experience a test drive so you can experience it for yourself. And I'm John Corcoran, the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships by helping them to run a podcast to generate a referral pipeline and ROI. And I've been a member of EO San Francisco for going on 3 years now. It's an amazing organization. And now let me introduce our guest. So his name is Joe Quitoni. He's the founder and CEO of Unify Align. It's really kind of shaking up the industry with a unique blend of creative and structural talents. Throughout his career, Joe has honed his skills in organizational transformation, creating game-changing competitive advantages for some of the world's biggest brands. Before starting Unify Align, he put in 20 years at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, served as director of human resources, before jumping over to the brand's consulting firm, the Ritz-Carlton Leadership Center, where he led the team as global head of delivery, helped to transform and evolve their approach and methodology while creating dramatic positive impact for clients and businesses. He also has a master's in science in industrial and organizational psychology, which, Joe, so great to have you here today. That actually relates to why you got into the work that you do. You were born and raised in New York. You observed that people would walk down the street, with their head down, looking at their feet. Same thing at work. People just didn't seem happy at work. And so you knew that you were interested in that and wanted to figure out why that was, that people were unhappy and how they could be happier at work. Before you tell me the answer to how you figured that out, I want to know, what was your worst job as a kid?
Oh boy. Well, John, first and foremost, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. My worst job as a kid was probably a telephone sales order. The orders come in, it's repetitive, it's very transactional. Customers were just a number. There was no opportunity to engage with people. It was, you get them in and you get them out. And that was the mentality that we were told to kind of have with the customers that were coming. So it was just, 9 to 5 transactional, and there was really no engagement level to it, which is something that I certainly am passionate about.
I mean, knowing just the little bit that I do about your personality, having heard you speak, you came and spoke to our EO San Francisco chapter retreat a couple of weeks ago, did an amazing job, just blew everyone away with your knowledge. I imagine that would be miserable for you to have that kind of job, right? Where you're
absolutely
stuck head down, just kind of a number puncher.
Absolutely. You said I'm from New York, so I wanted to move my hands around. I mean, I was in a cubby. I couldn't do anything. It kept me contained. And, there was just this lack of engagement. And I love people. It's something that drives me. Networks and connections drive me too. And to be somewhere where we were almost forced to do everything but that made me realize real quick that this was not the right job for me.
Oh, man. I had a few, I'll spare you the stories, but I had a few experiences like that as well. And it's amazing, really. Sometimes I say to young people now, having a bad job can be as good as having a good job, because it helps you get clarity around what you don't want and get clarity around what you do want to move towards. And you end up and actually go and get your master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology, which is kind of the study of how and why people are happy at work.
Yeah, it is. It's a really fancy word for human behavior at work. I like to categorize it as it's the study of what motivates people kind of like up here from the head to kind of take that knowledge, but to deliver the experiences from here, the heart. And ultimately what that does is it creates connections. Connections build trust. trust builds relationships, and relationships lead to the health and wealth of any organization. So it's a large stretch, but it's about making that mindset shift from I'm just a to I am the, and what I do matters. So creating that pride and that purpose and that sense of well-being, which ultimately comes down to the culture that organizations create for their employees.
Now, what drew you specifically to the hospitality industry?
It's a great story. I graduated, and right before graduation, I was doing my thesis, and I had to meet with an HR professional. And just by way of connections, a friend of a brother's sister's boyfriend's sister put me in contact with the director of human resources at one of the hotels with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. So, what started out as a 15-minute informational interview eventually led to a job offer. And I started with the company, realized that hospitality was an industry that suited me well. And the Ritz-Carlton was a phenomenal brand to work for. So it was a happy marriage.
Yeah. And hospitality. So I waited tables when I was in high school and college. And what's amazing about that is it is so face to face. There's no hiding at all. It is eye contact. It is engaging with people. And hospitality, kind of the same thing. We've all stayed at some property where people don't look you in the eye, they avoid you, you're trying to get their attention, that kind of thing. Talk a little bit about kind of the necessities of working in hospitality and how you need to be able to engage with people on a personal level.
I think it comes down to just a genuine will to want to serve, and that's one of the things that are not teachable or trainable. And, I tell a lot of clients, if you're looking for, say, a hospitality mindset within your industry, you have to find people who genuinely want to be around people and want to serve people. And like I said, you have to hire for that. You really do. And there's the right questions that you have to ask, thinking about asking questions to be able to understand what someone has done in the past and how that would attribute to success and if it's aligned with your culture. So you could train the eye contact. There's a rule, right? It's 15 feet, you make eye contact, 5 feet, you acknowledge. But at the end of the day, if that's not led with the heart and it doesn't feel genuine, that's exactly what customers will feel, that it's just transactional and you're doing it to check the box.
It kind of sounds like it's either the habit or they don't. So if you're coming into a situation where there are people in a role, or you're consulting with a one of your clients these days, and you see people that are not engaging it, in other words, is it something that can be trained or not?
I'd like to say it could, but I think reality tells us that it is innate. It's something that I think you could attempt to bring out of somebody. But at the end of the day, it's a genuine ability to want to help and be around people. And I don't know that that is trainable. I'd like to say it could be developed, but I don't know trained.
Yeah. Now, do you get pushback when a client comes to you and they say, you know what, we need a better customer experience. We're not doing a good enough job with the customers. We want them to be happier. We want higher approval ratings as far as the customer is concerned. And then you say, great, let's talk about your employees. Employees need to have a sense of belonging. Do you get pushback on that? And they say, what are you talking about? I don't care about that. I want to focus on the customer experience.
At first, of course, it's quite common. I think then I go through I call it the three-legged stool of any organization's success. Those clients who come to us and say, hey, we want to elevate our customer experience. I said, you highlighted an important word, experience. And when we think about that word, experience can be defined as the sum of service, which is providing counsel or service to somebody, but you marry that and you layer that in with a level of engagement. And that engagement comes by way of people. So if your people are not engaged, how could you expect for them to engage with your customers and deliver an elevated experience? So I like to say we have to take a holistic view to this. Employee engagement creates customer engagement, and that drives profitability and organizational success.
And so some of the things that I know that you focused on is kind of helping companies to reimagine their culture, develop purpose statements, that sort of thing. It's such a big topic. What is the process that you would take a company through? Let's say that you're talking to me and I'm thinking, a culture, we haven't really put enough thought into it. Where do we even start with that conversation?
I oftentimes like to start high. And while a vision statement I respect, a vision statement is often goal oriented. And I believe that culture should be behavior oriented. So I would say leave your vision for your strategic plan and focus on that and make it happen year over year. But create a purpose statement. A purpose statement creates a sense of belonging. A purpose statement should ideally never be achieved. And that's the beauty about it, is that it drives continuous improvement and innovation. So we'd start with a purpose statement, understanding why does this organization and this industry exist? What value do you bring to the people that you serve? And then after that, we would create a commitment, which is the what. So our purpose is the why. We'll then create a commitment statement that can unify your business. And we would insert behaviors within that so that any employee at any level within the business will understand what they need to do today to drive your purpose forward tomorrow. And then last but not least, we'd look at your values. And I think a lot of organizations have organizational values. However, if you don't define your perspective of that value, and you don't create, say, behaviors and characteristics that can then become habits, those values are going to be open to interpretation, and there's going to be a lack of connectivity to those who are expected to bring it to life. So through a long process, I would work with a group of employees, not the CEO, not the C-suite. They'll be part of the purpose statement. But then after that, I say, please step aside. I want to involve your people in this planning because it's ultimately them that we need the buy-in and ownership from. And when we engage them in that process, that's when we make that stick.
So can you give me some like examples of purpose statements and ones that work well or ones that don't work well?
Yeah, I think, a purpose statement that is very far reaching, a purpose statement that says we want to be the best in the space that we occupy, it's not going to fly. And in fact, I would say, that's probably where your competition is setting as well, or sitting as well. When you look at a purpose statement that says something along the lines of, we want to empower everybody to be, we want to empower the world to be more sustainable with efficiency or something of that nature, right? It's something that's far reaching. That it likely can't be achieved in this lifetime, but that's what drives people. Every day we come back to work, we know our purpose, we have a sense of belonging, and we want to rally cry behind something that can be so far reaching and create an ultimate positive change in the world.
I mean, what comes to mind for me is like, Elon Musk's SpaceX company, their purpose is to go to Mars, which seems crazy and unachievable. We'll see, history will tell if it's achieved in the next 10, 20 years. But how do you know if let's say you have a boring B2B business, how do you determine what that is without it being something totally fluff?
It's funny. I was doing a presentation not too long ago, and I was talking about the intent of a purpose and the power behind it. And there was an individual who worked in a manufacturing company. They made tires. And the gentleman mentioned to me, well, we work in a tire industry. The purpose, I don't know that I can connect to that. I don't know that I can get my employees behind that. We manufacture tires. So I did a little bit of a respectful challenging and said, well, why do you make those tires? To put them on cars. Why do cars need tires? To allow them to go from point A to point B. Why do cars need to go from point A to point B? To allow people to go on the journey of their life. There's your purpose, right? So digging back and peeling back the layers. And it's once you get there, it's almost like the aha. And that's why we're here. And that's what we intend to do. And when you get into a team of employees behind that, that's when that mindset shifts. I don't just work in manufacturing. I make tires and I make them for the right purpose.
Yeah, and keep your family safe while you're getting from, getting on with your life. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I know hiring and onboarding talent is an important piece of building a good culture. We could take those separately if you like. Talk a little bit about that, about some of the ways to build great culture when they're going through the hiring process.
Yeah, I think identifying talent is probably one of the most critical people processes that an organization should have in place. I'm a fan of behavioral interviewing. That allows for us to understand how one's previous behavior will predict future success and if it's aligned with your culture. And a lot of times with behavioral interviewing, we'll ask questions that will allow us to better understand what was the situation this applicant was facing, what did you do, and then what happened as a result of it. The one thing I always encourage clients to do is to weave in the behaviors that are embedded into their culture into the questions that they're asking of these applicants, so that you'll be able to understand the way that this individual handled this. Could this person be a culture contributor to our business? And that's ultimately what we're looking for. I don't want a cultural fit. It's a word that's been out there. I'm not a fan of it. I like culture contributor better. Diversity of thought provides innovation. It challenges the status quo. And that's ultimately what moves the organization forward. So being able to understand who could contribute to culture by way of inserting the behaviors that you expect your employees to deliver on is a very powerful process.
What about the onboarding process then?
Yeah, I mean, also significant and emotional. I recall my very first orientation. It was not a positive one. I was put into a room, gray walls, no windows. They gave me an index card and told me to color my personality with marker. And there was
What does that mean?
that's the introduction to this business, right? And then there was a stack of papers, and the HR representative came in and said, "Here, I went ahead and highlighted where you need to sign, so you don't need to go through the entire stack." So that is my expectation of this organization, right? Not the
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
Whereas today, I'm a firm believer and encourage clients where if you could do it on day one, there's significant power behind that. And when you have the power to immerse new employees on the first day of their job to the culture and the behaviors and the expectations and what's expected of them, you're allowing these employees to walk away and say, I joined the right company, I understand their culture, and I understand the role that I have in bringing it to life. And
yeah.
ultimately, you're setting your business and that employee up for success.
What came to mind there is I started my career in government. I worked in the Clinton White House and, federal government, right? Big bureaucracy. And one of the early first days, may not have been the first day, was the FBI grilling me. Goes with the territory, but it was not a really pleasant experience.
I bet.
Yeah, but you gotta endure it. But I want to ask you about employees. You say that you should ask the employees what that they need in order to have a great culture, like directly. So, if I'm an employer and I'm a hirer and, an employer, I have my own company, some things that come to mind is, well, geez, like, I don't know that I want the answer that I'm going to get back. There's probably some fears around that. So unpack that a little bit for us.
I'm sure there are some fears, but that's part of the business. And I think being open to that vulnerability, letting your employees know that you are there, you want transparency, and you want to make this the best possible place for them, right there, you're demonstrating respect and you're going to get that right back from the employees. So while I'll say, say 7 times out of 10, it's likely going to be opportunity areas as opposed to this is working really well, right? But when you uncover and you unpack what those opportunities are, you work with the employees and say, okay, we've identified it as an opportunity. What would you like to be done about it? And then you work through them, you empower them in that process, and suddenly they start to feel that they're part of something. And that ultimately starts to level up this engagement that's needed for them to do what we need them to do.
No. Now, a couple of years ago, there was this little thing called COVID. I know we're all trying to forget that it ever happened.
Yeah.
That was kind of a major change as far as culture was concerned. A lot of companies hadn't thought about their culture for a while. They suddenly realized that they needed to do something about it because everyone was working in a very different way for a period of time. So, what did you observe during that period of time in terms of how culture expectations were changed and how companies needed to think about their culture in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were calling it the Great Resignation, right? Where everyone was leaving for new purpose-driven work that was happening and surfacing throughout COVID. Whereas when people were thinking about the Great Resignation, I was thinking about the Great Retention. What are you doing to retain the top talent that you have? Asking them, what does work look like today? I challenge clients and say, if you haven't looked at your culture since COVID, you're behind the ball because expectations have drastically changed, both internally and what customers are looking for. So you need to evolve your culture and your model to meet those new expectations. Flexible work environments, they're everywhere right now. This is how we're communicating these days. Many people aren't seeing people on site and live anymore. So what does an engaging environment in a virtual world look like? And a lot of times, I'm a firm believer. What is your communications guidelines? How do you prefer to communicate? Do you want to be on Zoom? How often? And being able to meet people where they're at, I think allows for a higher level of productivity and engagement and ultimately efficiency throughout the business.
Yeah. Now I know one of the clients that you've worked with is a large IT services company. It's kind of an interesting case study in a sense because that was a company that had a culture, been around for, I don't know, many years, and had been a startup, but had since become a much larger IT services company. Hadn't really thought about what their culture was since the early days. And that's obviously a situation where a company really does need to think that through because it's a much different diversified company. So take us through those types of challenges that that type of company would experience.
Yeah, I mean, they have a great culture and really strong, creative, and cool core values. But when we went in, they hadn't been looked at since the company was started, which was well over about 20 years ago. And like we just said, since the expectations have changed, the company has evolved drastically. I mentioned that, don't change the values. We don't need to shake things up. Let's not re-engineer anything here. Let's keep the core values as they are. But let's work with your employees to say, for example, if one of your core values is integrity, what does integrity look like? What are the behaviors? What are the characteristics that you need to emulate today to bring integrity to life? So we went through a really cool working process where we pulled employees from different parts of the business, different locations, different levels, and we facilitated those conversations and ultimately created what I like to call these behaviors, success behaviors that identify how to bring each of these core values to life in every interaction. And ultimately, it led to the success that they're continuing to have today.
Now, I remember you talked about this during your presentation at the chapter retreat. What is the frequency that you recommend that companies should be working on culture? Is it something that like it's a quarterly meeting, go over the bullet points? Hey guys, here you go. Remember, these are our core values. Or are there more creative ways to kind of integrate it into the day to day or week to week, just so that a company's actually living it?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. And it's one that when I'm speaking to clients, it's sustainability, right? To go through the culture work, it's time, it's money, it's an investment, it's a lot of energy to put through. But then what happens once that's all created is the big question, right? How do we sustain this? Identifying the selection, onboarding, orientation, but then also communication is one of the easiest ways of sustainability. And a lot of my clients don't like to hear me say this, but I'm a firm believer that you should integrate this into your daily operation. Focus on maybe just one critical element of your culture and talk about it. What does it mean for you? How are you going to bring it to life today? This is our perspective of it. This is how we see it. And these meetings, if you would, become these really cool and creative conversations. And in theory, as a leader, I'm teaching and training my employees on what my expectation of them is to drive culture. And then the next day, you maybe go to another element, and then you go to another element, and you go to another element. And once you get through your entire culture model, what do? You start again. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you don't stop doing it. And a lot of times people say, well, doesn't that become repetitious? And my response is always the same, yes, and that's a good thing. Repetition equates to consistency. And when you talk about a message day in and day out, and you never deviate away from it, that's when culture becomes so much more than, say, words on a screensaver or a mouse pad. It becomes the DNA and the fiber that keeps the company together.
I want to ask about, when do you see culture breaking down a company that really struggles with getting it to work at all? Like, what are the ingredients that goes into that? Or another way of looking at this, what are the red flags that where that culture is going to be a struggle for this company, or they're not going to achieve the culture that they want to achieve?
Two red flags. The first is lack of commitment. So if we go in and we hear a CEO who says, all right, team, go ahead and make this happen, not going to happen. This has to be top down, bottom up, and everybody needs to be bought in and commit to driving this change for the future. And the other one is a lack of accountability. If you don't hold yourselves and others accountable for bringing these behaviors to life and reinforcing the behaviors, that eventually is just going to fall to the waistline. So I always like to say that the two red flags that I would say that would allow for culture not to stick would be lack of accountability and lack of commitment.
All right. Final question I want to ask, which is kind of like a how the sausage is made question, because you started your company not that long ago, about a year ago, at the tail end of COVID, and you went from 20 years of systems, process, culture, well-defined. You still work on it, but it's in place, to starting a new company, starting fresh.
Yeah.
And I know from building our company that no matter how much you want things to be flawless, they rarely are. And you stumble and you challenge, and the experience isn't as fluid as you want to be. And for you, holding knowing what the standard should be, that must be a challenge, right? You onboard a new consulting client, you want it to have this, platinum experience, but like any startup, it's hard to deliver on that the first time, the second time, even the 10th time.
Certainly.
So how have you been able to manage that process, or what have some of the struggles, if you're willing to share them, struggles been along the way?
It is a constant struggle. And you're right. I worked for an organization that was hyper-focused on details. Everything mattered, right? Nothing could fall through the cracks. But one of the things that I did learn was, transparency and looking at anything that comes my way that's not going right as just an opportunity to strengthen the next time around. And just remaining hyper-focused on why I did this in the first place. I knew there was going to be bumps. There's going to be bumps today, and there's going to be bumps 5 years from now. But using those as an opportunity to learn, to strengthen, to make them better in the future has definitely carried me forward in my business.
Yeah, and I guess just in the nature of the work that you do, you have to be a little bit okay with imperfection because there's going to be some messiness.
1000%. And that was very hard for me to grasp, believe it or not. But I learned very quickly that let the guard down. You're doing good, and you'll continue to get better as you go forward.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just one step at a time. Well, Joe, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and Unify and Align and the work that you do?
LinkedIn, Joe Quitoni, that's Quitoni, or of course, my website is www.unifyalign.com.
Excellent. All right, Joe, thanks so much.
Appreciate you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.